two very different crowds show up at Megacorp's door. 620 employees who need into dozens of Amazon Web Services accounts, and thousands of customers who just want to sign into the app. Reach for the same tool for both, and your whole access design quietly falls apart. Amazon Web Services built two separate front doors for exactly this reason. Welcome to episode 4 of Cloud Architect Path. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which Amazon Web Services service authenticates your employees and which one authenticates your customers, and why mixing them up breaks at scale. This lives in the design secure architectures domain, and the boundary between these two services decides more than one scenario question. In the last 2 episodes, we built up the core of IAM. Roles hand out short-lived STS credentials instead of risky long-term keys, and trust policies decide who's allowed to assume a role in the first place. Cross-account access needed both sides to agree. Now we scale identity outward, first to your whole workforce spread across many accounts, and then to the external users of your application. Let's pin down 5 terms you'll hear throughout this video. IAM Identity Center is the Amazon Web Services service for connecting your workforce to many accounts through one single sign-on portal. A permission set is a reusable bundle of IAM policies that Identity Center drops into each account as a role. A Cognito user pool is the directory that authenticates your apps and users and hands them tokens. A Cognito identity pool is a broker that swaps one of those tokens for temporary Amazon Web Services credentials. And SCIM is the protocol that keeps your corporate directory synced into Identity Center. Here's the mental split that makes everything else click. Your own staff need to get into Amazon Web Services accounts and internal tools to do their jobs. That's one population. Your application's end users need to sign into the product itself. They never touch your Amazon Web Services console. That's a completely different population. These are fundamentally different problems, so Amazon Web Services solve them with different services. And the very first question to ask on any scenario is simply this: are we talking about employees or customers? So here's the bright line to carry through the entire episode. Workforce, employees, corporate directory, single sign-on across many accounts goes to IAM Identity Center. Application end users, the people who sign into your product, go to Amazon Cognito. Once you can spot which population a scenario describes, the answer usually falls right out. Picture an office building. On the left, IAM Identity Center is the employee badge system. One badge lets a staff member into every floor they're cleared for, every account, every internal tool, without a separate key for each door. That's for the people who work here, Megacorp's 620 staff. On the right, Cognito is the visitor and customer sign-in desk down in the lobby. It handles the public coming in to use the service, and it can scale up to a crowd of millions. Those are the people who use our product, not the people who run it. Let's zoom into the workforce side. IAM Identity Center is the Amazon Web Services service for connecting your employees to accounts and business apps through a single sign-on portal. The power here is centralization. It gives you one place to assign permissions across every account in your organization, instead of managing each account separately. And when a user signs in, they get short-lived STS credentials, the same expiring credentials we covered back in episode 3. Never long-term keys. If the name sounds new, it's the successor to Amazon Web Services Single Sign-On, renamed on July 26, 2022. Amazon Web Services puts it plainly in their own documentation. Identity Center is the solution for connecting your workforce users to Amazon Web Services managed applications and other resources. And you can connect your existing identity provider and synchronize users and groups from your directory. Notice the 2 ideas packed in there: connect an existing provider and synchronize your users. Hold on to both, because we're about to see they're actually 2 separate jobs. Quick heads up that saves you on a question. Amazon Web Services renamed Single Sign-On to IAM Identity Center, but plenty of material still says Amazon Web Services SO. If a scenario uses the old name, just read it as IAM Identity Center. They're the same service. The old API namespaces even kept working for backward compatibility, so nothing underneath actually changed. So how does Identity Center actually scope what an employee can do in each account? Through permission sets. A permission set is just a reusable collection of IAM policies. Identity Center takes that set and provisions it as an IAM role into each account you assign it to. In practice, you map a group to an account, attach a permission set, and that group now has scoped short-lived access there. Here's a detail worth remembering. Permission sets are unique to Identity Center. Cognito has no equivalent, which is one clean way to tell the two services apart. Now, the real reason companies love this. Instead of cutting a separate house key for every room in a mansion, an IAM user at every account, you register your fingerprint once at the front door, and every room recognizes you. On the left, your corporate identity provider, whether that's Okta, Intra ID, or Active Directory. That flows into Identity Center in the middle, which holds your permission sets. And from there, one login fans out to every account, dev, prod, audit, all of them. Federate once, and your employees keep their single corporate login instead of juggling a pile of pair account IAM users. That arrow labeled SAML and SCIM is doing two separate jobs, and people mix them up constantly. Think of SAML as the turnstile at login time. When a known employee shows up to sign in, SAML verifies that they're a real employee, handling the actual authentication handshake and letting them through. But here's the catch. SAML on its own cannot list who all your employees are from the identity provider. That's SCIM's job. SCIM is the HR feed that keeps the building's roster current, syncing your users and groups into Identity Center ahead of time and deprovisioning them when they leave. So SAML verifies someone at login, and SCIM keeps the directory in sync. You usually need both. One shortcut worth knowing. If you already run Microsoft Active Directory, on-prem or as Amazon Web Services manage Microsoft AD, Identity Center can connect to it directly through Amazon Web Services Directory Service. No SAML, no SCIM setup required. That plumbing is only for external providers like Okta or Entra. So when a scenario says the company already runs Active Directory, the direct connection is your queue. Let's log in the workforce side before we cross over. Employees federate once through the corporate provider into Identity Center. Permission sets then grant them scoped, short-lived access across many accounts. SAML logs them in, and SCIM keeps the directory in sync, or you connect Active Directory directly and skip both. That's the whole workforce story. Now let's walk across the lobby to the customer sign-in desk. Before we get into Cognito, let's kill the most common wrong answer head-on. Never create an IAM user for each external customer of your app. It feels natural. You know how to make IAM users, but it's the wrong mental model entirely. IAM users are for the people who run your infrastructure, not the crowd using your product. That job belongs to Cognito, and here's exactly why. There's a hard ceiling in the way. IAM users default to a quota of 5,000 per account. So imagine a mobile game with millions of players. You could never fit that crowd inside a 5,000 user limit. It's not just tight, it's physically impossible. On top of that, IAM users carry long-term credentials, which are risky and meant for internal or administrative use, not scattered across a million client devices. Cognito solved both problems by issuing temporary role-based credentials instead. That's the whole reason it exists. Here's how Amazon Web Services defines it. Cognito is an identity platform for web and mobile apps, a user directory, an authentication server, and an authorization service. Notice it names three things there: because Cognito really has two halves that do two different jobs. One half proves who you are. The other half decides what Amazon Web Services resources you're allowed to touch. Getting those two halves straight is the heart of this whole topic. First half, the user pool, and its whole job is authentication. The user pool is a directory for your app's users. It handles sign up, sign in, multi-factor authentication, and password policies. It even ships with a hosted login screen, and it can federate to social logins or a customer's own SAML provider. After someone logs in, the pool issues them tokens, JSON Web Tokens or JWTs, an ID token, an access token, and a refresh token. Boil it all down, and the user pool answers exactly one scenario. Who is this user? There's a nightclub analogy that makes this stick. The user pool is the bouncer at the door. They check your ID, confirm you really are who you claim to be, and once you're verified, you're in. That's authentication. Who you are. The identity pool, on the other hand, is the coat check attendant inside. You hand over your token, and they give you back a numbered ticket that unlocks specific lockers. That ticket is temporary Amazon Web Services credentials. That's authorization, what you can actually touch. Bouncer proves identity. Coat check grants access. We'll dig into that second half right now. Second half, the identity pool, and its job is authorization. Think of it as a credentials broker. It takes a trusted token, say the JWT from your user pool, and exchanges it for temporary Amazon Web Services credentials from STS. Along the way, it maps the user to an IAM role, and that role scopes exactly which Amazon Web Services resources they can reach. This is what lets a browser or mobile app hit S3 or DynamoDB directly, with no long-term keys baked into the client. So the identity pool answers a different question entirely. What Amazon Web Services resources can this user actually touch? If you remember one sentence from this entire video, make it this one. User pools authenticate. Who you are. Identity pools authorize what you can access. Reversing those two is the single most common Cognito mistake people make. Keep the words paired in your head. Pool of users proves identity. Pool of identities grants credentials. Now watch both halves work together. This is the canonical Cognito pattern. It starts with the app user on the left. They log into the user pool, which authenticates them and returns a JWT. The app then carries that token to the identity pool, which swaps it for temporary STS credentials. And with those short-lived credentials in hand, the app reaches straight into Amazon Web Services services like S3 and DynamoDB. User pool proves who they are. Identity pool grants scoped access, and no long-term keys ever touch the client. That's the flow the exam loves to draw. Amazon Web Services describes that exact flow in one sentence. Your app exchanges a user pool token with an identity pool for temporary Amazon Web Services credentials, and that delivers authorized access to services like S3 and DynamoDB. Every piece of what we just drew is in there. The token from the user pool, the swap at the identity pool, and the temporary credentials reaching real Amazon Web Services resources. When you see this on the exam, you'll recognize it instantly. Now, here's a nuance that trips people up. You don't always need both halves. If your app only needs to protect its own API, a user pool alone is enough. No identity pool required. API Gateway can validate those JWTs natively with a Cognito user pools authorizer, so you don't even write a custom Lambda authorizer. And an application load balancer can run the whole login flow itself, then forward a signed token to your app. So the rule is simple. Add an identity pool only when the client needs to call Amazon Web Services services like S3 directly. If it just needs to reach your own API, the user pool does the job by itself. Here's what that looks like in practice when a request hits API Gateway. The client sends its request carrying the token in the authorization header. The Cognito authorizer then checks the token's signature, confirms it was issued by your user pool, and verifies it hasn't expired. All three checks pass. It pulls out the user's identity and the request sails through with a 200. Notice what didn't happen. No Lambda authorizer was ever invoked. API Gateway validated the token entirely on its own. That's the efficiency of the user pool alone pattern. One more distinction before we recap, because it's a tempting wrong turn. Cognito is not a supported identity source for IAM Identity Center. You cannot bolt Cognito on as your workforce directory. It has no permission sets, no account level access controls. Cognito is for customers, Identity Center is for employees, and the wall between them is deliberate. If a scenario tries to route staff through Cognito, that's your signal it's the wrong answer. Let's turn all of this into the decision rules you'll actually use. Reach for Identity Center whenever you see employees, a corporate directory, single sign-on across multiple accounts, or staff meeting console and command line access, all backed by short-lived credentials from permission sets. Reach for Cognito whenever you see web or mobile app users, customers, sign up and sign in, or social login, where the user pool authenticates and issues tokens, and the identity pool hands out temporary Amazon Web Services credentials. Spot which column a scenario lives in, and you're most of the way to the answer. Let's lock in what to carry forward. Workforce and many accounts go to Identity Center. Application end users go to Cognito. Within Cognito, user pools authenticate, who you are, and identity pools authorize, what you can touch. Never create IAM users for external customers, because the 5,000 quota and long-term keys make it wrong at scale. A user pool alone protects your own API, and you add an identity pool only when the client must reach Amazon Web Services directly. And on the workforce side, federate with SAML for login and SCIM for sync, or connect Active Directory directly. Now let's see how well all of this stuck with a quick 5-question quiz. All right, time to put your knowledge to the test. Question 1. A company's 620 employees need single sign-on to 15 Amazon Web Services accounts using their existing Okta directory, with short-lived credentials scoped per account. Which service fits? Is it A, create IAM users in each account and share credentials? B, Amazon Cognito user pools with Okta Federation? C, Amazon Web Services IAM Identity Center federated to Okta? Or D, Amazon Cognito identity pools issuing temporary credentials? Think about which population this describes before you answer. The right call here is C. Employees, a corporate directory, and single sign-on across many accounts are the classic Identity Center signals. It federates to Okta for login and hands out short-lived credentials through permission sets. Cognito is for customers, not staff. And IAM users per account are exactly the anti-pattern we want to avoid. Question 2. A mobile app needs each signed-in user to upload files straight to their own S3 prefix from the device, with no long-term Amazon Web Services keys baked in. Which Cognito component provides the temporary Amazon Web Services credentials? A, the identity pool, which exchanges the token for temporary STS credentials via an IAM role. B, the user pool, which issues JWTs used directly as Amazon Web Services credentials. C, an IAM user created automatically for each app user. Or D, a permission set attached to the user pool. Lock in your answer before I give it away. It has to be A, and here's why. Reaching Amazon Web Services resources directly means authorization, and that's the identity pool's job. It swaps the user's token for temporary STS credentials tied to an IAM role. A user pool's JWTs are not Amazon Web Services credentials, permission sets belong to Identity Center, and auto-creating IAM users would slam into the 5,000 quota. Question 3. A team wants to protect a REST, a PI, so only authenticated app users can call it. Users sign in through a Cognito user pool, and the API itself doesn't call any Amazon Web Services service on the user's behalf. What's the simplest valid design? A. Add a Cognito identity pool to issue Amazon Web Services credentials for every request. B. Use an API gateway to say Cognito user pool's authorizer to validate the token with no identity pool. C. Attach an IAM permission boundary to each API caller. Or D. Place the API behind IAM Identity Center. Think about which constraint matters most here. This one is B. Since the API only needs to confirm who's calling and never touches Amazon Web Services for the user, a user pool alone is enough. API Gateway validates the token natively with a Cognito user pool's authorizer. An identity pool would be over-engineering. Permission boundaries are for capping IAM identities, and Identity Center is for workforce access, not app users. Question 4. During an Identity Center setup with an external SAML provider, employees can log in fine, but their groups never show up in Identity Center for assigning permission sets. What's missing? A trust policy allowing the provider to assume roles. B. A Cognito identity pool to broker the groups. C. A second identity source in Identity Center. Or D. SCIM provisioning to synchronize users and groups from the provider. Got your pick? Let's see. If you said D, well done. SAML authenticates users at login, but it cannot list the provider's users or groups on its own. That's SCIM's job. It syncs users and groups into Identity Center ahead of time so you can assign permission sets to them. Cognito has no role here, and Identity Center only supports one identity source at a time anyway. Question 5. Let's test a concept from an earlier episode. A third-party SaaS vendor needs to assume a role in your account to read an S3 bucket. What condition defends against the confused deputy problem? A. An external ID required in the role's trust policy. B. A permission set scoped to the S3 bucket. C. A SCIM sync from the vendor's directory. Or D. A Cognito identity pool mapping the vendor to a role. Run the decision rule from episode 3 before you answer. The answer is A. Back in episode 3, we covered the confused deputy problem, where an attacker tricks a privileged third party into acting on their behalf. The external ID is a shared secret, placed as a condition on the role's trust policy, so only the specific vendor can assume it. Permission sets, SCIM, and Cognito are all about workforce or app identity. None of them address cross-account trust. Okay, workforce and application identity. IAM Identity Center and Cognito is in the bag. If you're getting value here, subscribing is a free way to keep these coming and reach more students like you. I read every single comment, so let me know what helped and what tripped you up. Want a different certification covered? Suggest it below. And if you've got ideas to make the style or the flow better, I'm all ears. See you in the next one.